Right, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch, and I hope you enjoyed the sessions that we had before lunch and after lunch. I'm James White. I'm technical lead for the Western Gateway subnational transport body. The Western Gateway stretches from Gloucestershire in the north down through South Gloucestershire, Bristol, North Somerset, Bath and North East Somerset, Wiltshire, Dorset to Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. And rail, as with all the other STBs, it's very much a key issue for all of us. And I'm very pleased to say that this afternoon, with this session, we're going to be talking about Great British Railways. It's a very exciting time for the rail industry at the moment. And as STBs, we all want to, I think, take an increasingly active role in what's happening on rail. And it's my great pleasure to introduce this afternoon Anit Chandarana, who is the lead director for the Great British Railways transition team. As I say, it's a very exciting time. One might say it's quite turbulent times as well in the rail industry, but certainly challenging. But I won't steal any of Anit's thunder. So please welcome Anit up to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Exciting has many meanings, and turbulent is absolutely part of that. So for those of you who didn't catch that, my name's Anit Chandarana, and I'm the lead director for the GBR transition team, where our mission is to create a simpler, better railway for everyone in Britain. And indeed, exciting is one of the words, but also very necessary, once-in-a-generation opportunity, actually, to change the way the railways work in this country so that it truly serves our local communities, our regions, and our nation as a whole. And of course, to do that, we're going to have to work with lots of people, including pretty much all of you in this room, both in our transition phase, but more importantly, as we get into Great British Railways in the fullness. So today I'm going to take about 10 to 15 minutes to describe some of our shared goals, and then hopefully leave plenty of time for questions too. Because I'm sure that despite our best attempts to try and guess what you might want to hear about, we're going to miss the mark in some way or other. So we'll use Slido for that. And just a reminder, STBC 23, that's the Slido title for those of you who may not have taken part. But before we go too far, it's just worth remembering a little bit why we are doing the job we do and why rail reform is really so required. Now, a lot has happened since Keith Williams in 2018 was appointed to carry out the Williams Review. But actually, the fundamental problems of the railway have remained the same. And of course, recent events have brought some of that into sharp focus with workforce reform and some of the issues we've had in train operators. What customers say to us is that the railway is too expensive, it's too complex, and it's unreliable. Our customer satisfaction is at a pretty low ebb, and it's continuing to decline after what was potentially a slightly artificial high during COVID. Suppliers, those who work with the industry and on behalf of rail, say we're too siloed, we're too slow, we're too prescriptive, and the private sector that operates services on behalf of the industry talk of feeling denuded of their responsibilities that doesn't make the best of their skills and the talent that they have in their organisations. So against that backdrop, which hasn't changed fundamentally since Keith did his review, Keith's primary recommendations was that, or finding was that actually the industry was very fragmented and it didn't actually come together until the Secretary of State's desk, which can't be right. So one of his recommendations was the creation of the guiding mind, where decisions are made across the system to optimise the system as a whole, and that are made in the best interests of customers and taxpayers, backed up by a long-term approach aligned to a guiding strategy. So where are we now in this moment in time now? Unless you had your head firmly in the sand, it won't have escaped anyone's attention that we've had a slightly turbulent time with Big B politics in Westminster during the course of last year. And that has meant absolutely that it had an impact on our timescales. The Plan for Rail was published in 2021, and since that time we've had 3 Prime Ministers, 3 Transport Secretaries and 5 Chancellors of the Exchequer. So as I say, that has led to delays in decision-making across many political agendas, this one included. But actually, since November, we've had enormous amount of progress with the current Secretary of State, Mark Harper, along with Rail Minister Hugh Merriman. And as some of you may be aware, that support was made public in early February when the Secretary of State delivered the Bradshaw Address and confirmed his support for rail reform and the creation of the guiding mind as named Great British Railways. What some of you may not know was that speech was signed off by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor personally, so we can take with confidence that they also support the railways. So this is important because you will have probably seen quite a lot of news articles and read stories about in the media that the government is no longer backing the creation of a guiding mind or indeed the wider reforms as laid out by Keith Williams. This simply isn't true. What is true, though, is the discussions about when legislation will take place are undecided. And we are continuing to put the case for getting the necessary legislation completed in this Parliament. But there is a chance that legislation won't happen during that session. Now, we absolutely believe that legislation is required to properly lock in and maximise the benefits of bringing track and train together. And I'll explain that in a bit more detail in a bit. But in the absence of legislation, doing nothing is not an option. So, because the railways need change, and I gave you some reasons why earlier on. There is no fundamental alternative plan. There are many who have suggested they are. Indeed, 3 Secretaries of State have come along, and their first instance, their response to us was, we don't need this. But 3 times out of 3, we've managed to show them why the industry wasn't where it needed to be and why this was a credible plan. So we're going to continue to move forwards in trying to create that guiding mind, and we're in good discussions with Transport Secretaries and the Department for Transport on what we may do in the instance we don't get legislation, whilst also continuing to push for legislation. But let's draw out the lens for a moment. And as we've heard earlier today, multiple times, public transport works best as part of an integrated multimodal transport mix. Rail is too often considered as a singular issue, particularly by those of us in the rail industry, but actually by some outside too. And instead of being viewed as part of a wider public transport system which can help to unlock local and national growth, connecting people with jobs, education, healthcare, and providing social inclusion, as well as connecting goods with markets too. What we need to do is work with all of you to build a reliable, affordable, effective, integrated transport system that works for people we serve, collectively serve. But we know we are not there yet, and to get there we need to make things better. And as part of that, I truly believe that bringing track and train together is essential, not treated separately as they are now, so we can help to integrate with other transport modes in a way that customers rightly expect. And so by way of example, I'm going to touch on three examples of opportunities where this might happen. Firstly, supporting local people and priorities of the locally elected leaders. By putting strategy at the heart of our conversations, we create the ability to join up. We know, for example, that local, regional and national transport authorities are increasingly focused on active travel and constraining car trips. So what options do we have in rail to help with that and support it? Well, for example, we could allocate space at stations for shared cycles and e-scooters and better facilities for those who walk or cycle to stations. We can work with the bus sector to better integrate timetables. We could make space at stations for mobility hubs and support the emergence of demand-responsive transport. And we could collectively create a transport sector that encourages people to leave their cars at home for journeys where public transport is the better option. Secondly, we could look at making better use of property that is currently in the rail envelope. redevelopment of brownfield land to support sustainable housing, commercial development, and the creation of community spaces. If we embrace this environment our stations are in, it gives us the opportunity to support the ambitions of our cities and regions in the creation of new centres of activity. And of course, the UK population is expected to grow by several million over the next few decades. And with a shortage of affordable housing, it's critical we get land use and planning tied in so that transport is part of the planning stages rather than something that comes afterwards. Thirdly, we can support integrating our information and ticketing systems and fares. Customers expect a simple, easy-to-use ticketing system that allows them to move seamlessly from train to tram to bus to cycle. In order to get from what they will really want is to get from A to B. Evidence shows that where this can be made to work well, ridership rises. To that extent, we are already partnering with Transport for Greater Manchester, Transport for West Midlands and West of England to bring rail to existing pay-as-you-go schemes, but there is still more we can do. I hope you can see that if we work together, we can create well-located homes and communities connected with jobs and leisure and reduce car dependency for future generations, whilst also putting customers at the heart of what we do. And to help us do this, we are developing the first long-term strategy for rail in a generation. And one of the commitments the Secretary of State gave at the Bradshaw report is that this long-term strategy for rail will be published later this year. Lots of you and your organisations have already helped us to get to the stage we are, responding to the call for evidence and the subsequent engagement we've had since then. We're using an objective-led and evidence-based approach to develop this strategy. And it's being shaped by 5 long-term national strategic objectives for rail that were set by government. And I want to be clear here, this wasn't just set by the Department for Transport. This was signed off by the whole of government at the Cabinet table. And in that regard, there are 5. 1, meeting customer needs, and that includes value for money, being multimodal, and of course the important issue of safety. Secondly, financial sustainability. Thirdly, the role that rail can play in economic growth. Fourthly, levelling up and connectivity. And 5, environmental sustainability, both in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of rail and modal shift that's included within that, but also importantly, how rail adapts to climate change as well. And while the long-term strategy isn't yet ready to share, I can begin to share with you some of the headlines that are emerging from that. Now, some of these might sound obvious, but they are the foundations for that strategy development. The railway needs to improve. It must deliver a reliable service to its customers and to reduce the cost to the taxpayer. Reform and modernisation are key to both of those. It must make extra efforts to improve existing investments better than it has in the past. There are key decisions that need to be made that must be taken quickly and must take account of the long-term and broader network implications as well as the wider socio-economic needs. Importantly, rail has a place in public transport. So therefore, we should exploit what rail is good at, understand the financial and economic value of rail in different markets in geographies, and rail should focus on its resources on what rail does well. The opposite is also true, i.e. that we should not use rail where it's not appropriate to do so and where more appropriate alternatives exist. There is an opportunity to grow rail freight, and we must grab that. The ambitions of freight must be part of an integrated strategy for the network that also takes account of existing investment decisions. And rail's contribution to decarbonisation should focus on achieving modal shift in rail's core markets and low-cost options for further improvements in rail's carbon performance, whilst also recognising how the industry can tie up with other modes of transport. Ultimately, it's about creating a robust decision-making framework that help us prioritise investments in the context of those strategic objectives and provide a much-needed long-term vision. And I hope what you can see in a lot of what I've said there is actually how it ties in to the broader transport requirements as well. So what of GBR itself? What is our work telling us about where it's headed? We are in no doubt that the railway needs a wholesale, genuine reform. Today, the railway is separated, with the biggest revenue decisions being taken separately from the biggest cost decisions. No enterprise would organise itself that way. And as a consequence of that, what happens is we get good people, making decisions driven by the objectives in their fragment. The problem is when we put those fragments together, it doesn't always give us the best overall answer. There is no single view on the railway's finances and how they come together and how those decisions lead to optimum outcomes. Connected thinking could make so much more of those important investments and make it easier for our partners to work with us to identify and deliver future opportunities. We recognise STBs provide real value in creating multimodal strategies for their regions. There have been some excellent recent examples, such as the Transport East Rail Report, the Midlands Connect Rail Hub prospectus, and the new Transport for the North strategy, to quote just a few. But wow, as a rail industry, we don't make it easy for you to work with us. For a start, as I mentioned before, modal integration is not built into the DNA of the railway. And the fractured, misaligned structures makes convening stakeholders and gaining consensus difficult. Often, when you do manage to do that, there is no clear decision-making to actually carry those decisions forward. And with no overarching industry strategy, there are no guidelines for what investment will be taken forward, meaning that too often good work is not followed through upon. And without introducing that guiding mind, we will make the same mistakes again and again. And to support this, a new guiding mind for rail must be decentralised, working through regional businesses and partnerships with regional authorities, bodies like yourselves, and other local interests. So decisions are considered and taken in the most local level possible, and by those who know their towns, cities, and regions best. Some of you will have heard that Derby has been chosen as the GBR HQ. And that's a brilliant decision to move away from London. But truth is, taking decisions on Bristol's railways are no better done in Derby than they are in London. Bristol needs to take its decisions for Bristol. Obviously, an important step in that direction was the announcement of the Trailblazer deals in the budget in March, one being in here in Birmingham itself. So the structure of GBR will support and underpin this, building partnership working into the DNA of a new guiding mind by adopting a locally devolved, locally accountable as a clear principle of reform. So how do I believe that this new organisation is going to work with the STBs? So supporting regional ambitions is, I hope, what you've heard at the centre of what we see in the GBR structure. And I think there are 2 points I want to make very clear. Firstly, I really absolutely see STBs continuing to have a critical role in the future of rail and the wider transport environment. In our engagement already, and it was useful to hear Maria referencing those in her opening comments this morning, in our engagement with you today, it is clear that you have different ambitions, not just for your locations, but also the roles that you might wish to play. So we very much see our role as an enabler to those strategies and the way in which you want to work, in how you make your towns, cities, and regions thrive and connect and be connected places to live, work, and visit. That is part of being a guiding and not a controlling mind, and ensuring decisions are taken in the most local level where possible by those who know their regions and their people the best. We want to continue to work collaboratively with STBs to serve customers and local residents, independent of formal arrangements or structures. And we're not going to wait for GBR to stand up and unlock those benefits from working together. We are currently focused on developing formal partnerships agreements with Greater Manchester and West and East Midlands as part of those Trailblazer deals. And as part of that, we're also working with Transport for the North in understanding how they can also be part of that journey. That will help us understand and learn a lot about what these things might look like. But as we go forward, we absolutely expect GBR's future empowered regional leadership to engage and agree both formal and informal partnership agreements with those STBs. So to conclude the speech part of this, some people talk to me about whether I'm excited about the railway of the future, and I absolutely am. The reason for that is because not just the railway, but public transport as a whole are, as I see it, essential to meeting our aspiration for connectivity and sustainability. Without a well-integrated transport system, I can't quite see how we can do that. And we do recognise that actually rail is being backed as part of a big round of investment. Billions of pounds of public money are being spent in public transport, in rail as well. Not just in the investments that happen through the enhancements programme, for example, but also in the daily running of the railways. But we also believe that to really unlock and realise their full potential, we must all work together, and we are absolutely committed to making that happen. We see a future partnership between GBR and STBs as being central to that ability to deliver it, where we bring our own skills and understanding to the fore. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. And I hope we have left plenty of time for questions, which I know I'm going to be grilled on in a minute. I do really encourage open questions. I'll do my best to answer them. If I can't answer them, I'll also be honest too.
Right. Thank you very much, Janet. And well, Few. I mean, that's an awful lot going on, isn't
Indeed.
it? And the sheer complexity of what's happening behind the creation of GBR. We have had an awful lot of questions come in. You're probably relieved to know that we don't have time to tackle most of them. But I'll just jump in, first of all, with one from sort of the SDB point of view. I mean, you mentioned about that working in partnership and going forward together. And in that absence of legislation at the moment, what more can we be doing as SDBs to help you, and what can you do to help us in going forward?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think there's a number of things. First of all, you can hold us to account for what I've said here as we engage with you. You know, are we engaging with you? Are we really doing what we think we are doing in a meaningful way? And we've had some really productive conversations with you and your colleagues around actually, quite frankly, where we weren't doing that in some of our time. But moving on, it is so clear to me that the SDBs have been around long enough now to have a really mature understanding of the places they operate, really enviable quality of analysis, strategic insight. And of course, you are there not just to promote the rail industry, you're there to promote transport as a whole. We can get quite siloed in our thinking, and you can help us not to get away from that. And then without legislation, the great thing about if we get legislation is it all gives us this catalyst, doesn't it, to want to do something different. What we must be determined on is without that catalyst, we will still get around those tables and we'll still come to the same, to understand. Now, what I'm also very clear of, and we shouldn't be dewy-eyed about this, is we will have differences of opinion. But actually, that's where the value is. That's the huge opportunity we have to understand those differences and put them on the table and work through them.
Yep. Thank you, Annette. Unfortunately, we've almost really run out of time, and this being a discussion about trains, we ought to try and finish on time. But there were loads and loads of really sorry, poor joke, really. Lots of really interesting questions about things like fares, for legislation, what impact that's going to have, the need to balance the capacity requirements for passengers and freight. And you did mention freight in your speech. The need to accelerate delivery and as a way to actually reduce costs, but also to maximise and realise the benefits a lot earlier. And comments like, well, be more positive about selling rail. Well, I think you have been very positive about selling rail, and I hope everyone did pick up on all of that. And so just one very quick question to finish up on, and that's. Well, I think you've made it very clear it's all going to happen, but quite a few people are asking, is GBR going to happen? Will it all change in 12 months' time? Put you on the spot a bit there, I'm afraid. But what's your crystal ball forecast?
Well, I'll take this in two guises. Firstly, if you take the current colour of politics, I've absolutely looked Mark Harper in the eye, and I'm really very clear that he does believe in the benefit of this. And I'm also confident in our collective ability to convince if someone who might replace him that it's still the case, because we've had to do it so often, we're well versed in it. But also, the railways are in a difficult place at the moment. If not this, then it has to be something else. We cannot continue on an industry that lets down its passengers and its freight customers in the way that we do today. Otherwise, we'll be presiding over an industry that is declining and ultimately it doesn't exist in the way that it does today. And this country deserves more than that, because the railways can deliver such a huge amount of benefit, working as part of that multimodal transport system that I talked about. And I'm confident that as people look at it, they come to that same conclusion. So resilience is not something that I was known for before this endeavour that I'm now on. It's certainly something I believe in now, because I see it not just for myself, but others support us in this endeavour.
Yep. Thank you very much. And I mean, you did make that point about doing nothing is not an option. Indeed. Which I think really emphasises that. I think that's been a really, really insightful and very, very informative presentation by Annette. I have to say, wish you good luck. Thank you. Going forward, and obviously open invitation to work with us continually on that. So please, could you all give a round of applause?
Thank you.